My name is Brian Cooper. As Ryan said, I'm the Director of Industry Solutions. I've been with Clio almost 8 years now, but I've been in the MFT and B2B integration space for longer than I care to admit at this point, probably about 19 or so years. Again, right, the last 7 or 8 with Clio. So it's been an amazing ride. Just enjoy working with customers and trying to help solve some of the problems that we see in the integration space. It's evolving so fast as far as the coming of APIs to help kind of ease some of the restrictions or limitations, you could say, is that some of the legacy EDI and some of the technologies that have been around for a while have presented themselves over time. So again, thank you for coming. So first, I wanted to start off with kind of talking about some high-level topics around supply chain disruption. I swiped some of this information from one of our reports that the marketing guys generate. So I'm sure we can pass some of this information on to you guys as well. But I talked to a lot of folks about how can they evolve, because most everybody comes with a problem, right? They've got some sort of issue or an evolution that they're trying to solve for, as if they're modernizing their TMS to be more efficient, or they're trying to onboard various customers and take customers as you want to, whether it be shippers or carriers or otherwise. And they're just having limitations because the scale of their business and the growth of their business is kind of limited to how fast it can be done. And depending on the technologies and how they've had things built up until now, it's become, over the last couple of years, right? Some of those inefficiencies have been highlighted, meaning, so the COVID era, if you want to go that far, just some of the cracks that were there that were managed by people become kind of more noticeable. So what we've seen is a lot of people trying to solve that problem by investing in technology, which I think is a great idea. A bunch of numbers here that kind of help to articulate how investing in the technology can help reduce some of the supply chain disruptions that we've seen. That can go as far as trading partner onboarding time to bad data being exchanged, and not just solving the problem, but addressing the issue. Right, putting a Band-Aid on it doesn't always make it better. So if we go a little further, right, so the investments in the supply chain technology arena, right, whether it be TMS or WMS, or a better integration platform, or just the evolution of your business from a maturity perspective, can pay off big dividends if you look at it in the right frame of mind. So a lot of these numbers here, I think are really interesting to look at, and where everybody's kind of at a different point in their journey, right? Whether you're growing or whether you're trying to scale, and just looking at what is going to differentiate you guys from your competitors in your various spaces is something that we're trying to solve with an ecosystem based approach. So if we go to kind of look at the maturity model, that some of us internally, I don't know if you guys attended a Clio Connect recently. There was one last week, but there was one back in late December of last year where Frank Kenny, who's an industry specialist here at Clio, has kind of worked with us internally and talked to a lot of customers about this evolution of the logistics space. And we've got your starting point, your presence, differentiation, growth, profitability, scale. And everybody kind of falls in one of these areas, right? Whether you're just trying to be different and then you get to growth. And what we've noticed is that there's a bit of a hitch in some specifically for brokerages and asset-based carriers, is that the growth has to come after the profitability. So you have to become profitable first, and then you try to grow. So the paradigm shifts a little bit in how you should look at the ways you're implementing technology, right? So it's not just, hey, I'm going to go from growth, how can I grow and then become profitable? It's like, because of the margins and how the business functions, I need to become profitable, and finding ways to get from various stages of this growth model is where Clio kind of fits in, right? So we can help kind of look at it from a future-proofing perspective, from an integration perspective, to help provide some additional flexibility for being able to transition from phase to phase as you go along. So if we take a look at, again, right, if we take the problem as, hey, how do I mitigate my supply chain disruptions and how do I evolve and grow the business? What is a potential solution? And I think our perspective is really focused on this ecosystem integration platform, right? So in our vernacular, that's really Clio Integration Cloud. So, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this wheel slide. I just added it just because I think it's a good way to articulate the evolution of how Clio can help you along each phase of your journey. So looking at from the top left again is where we typically start, right? It's part of that the front end 1 and 2, right? The growth piece and just differentiation is how can I become more friendly, right, in quotes, to my customers, right? How can I connect to them? How can I get the data in? How can I work with the tools that I have? So making it easier to do business with, providing flexibility to the customers. And then it becomes more around a control and operations perspective, right? Now that I've got all these connections, how do I manage it? How can I, do I need to have staff on hand? Do I want to farm this out to a managed service, or do I want a hybrid approach, right? Both ways can work from a Clio perspective. And we find a lot of folks find a lot of value in that ability to, one, own what they can and what they want to, and then have us help with the rest, or provide, a partner of ours that can help come and help implement as your business needs change. And then when we start getting down into more of the solution-based perspective, and we'll talk more about these later, right? It's not just EDI, right? Not at all EDI based, right? There's flavors of EDI, right? And that's a big part of it. But there's so many other things, and I've got a whole stack of use cases that we'll cover here in a little bit with some examples of how that'll work. And then as you evolve kind of into the scaling phases, right, we're talking about, from a compliance and security perspective, we've got Radar as far as a visibility and analytics perspective, and I'll talk more about that as well as insights. And we'll see some of that inside the cockpit when I switch over to the demo here in a minute. So as we kind of creep forward, right, if I take a step back and what does that wheel mean, right, from a technology perspective, right, we've got, here is really more kind of what we call it the architecture slide of what it actually is. So over here are your internal systems, right, and I just put a big swatch of ERPs and TMSs and WMSs over here, and really it's really about the personas. Right, the technology is one thing, right? Exchanging data is obviously a baseline to be able to do, but it's how can I take this data that's flowing between various endpoints, whether that be an application externally or applications internally or trading partners or whatever you want to call it. How do I take that and make it so that somebody who doesn't understand the technology can consume it and take action? So I look at it as really two paths in the middle, right? There is a technical data flow that happens, right? Data exchanges, we transform it and send it off somewhere. And inside of that, right, or on top of it rather, there's business value to that data, right? There's interesting bits of information that would be great that someone didn't have to go ask a question to somebody else or open a ticket. To be able to expose that to a group of folks, right, whether that be a dispatcher, broker, freight analyst, IT systems manager, or even sharing some of that with your trading partners, right? It depends on the use case. But being able to take the data that's being exchanged between external entities and internal entities and being able to pull what you want out of it, right? And that what you want is what is specific to you. It is super powerful. Being able to create a business layer on top of a technical layer and have it all in one spot, I think is a big deal. And the other piece that's really slick is that as we start looking at the, when we're starting to exchange data or having to provide extra data out to other applications for trading partners, so like we start talking about these external visibility platforms and logistics. If we're talking about manufacturing or retail or wholesale, right? It's other e-commerce platforms like Amazon or Walmart Plus or Target. Right, being able to take the same output that you generate internally and send it one time and then send it to multiple places, right? So take my same bits of data and I can update everybody all at once. I don't have to customize, a different script or make the data happen twice or anything, right? We're minimizing the impact to individuals once we build a flow around it. So where I was going to head today, primarily from a demo perspective, is in the cockpit, because that's where a lot of we call it magic happens. So if we look at the CIC cockpit, and we'll see a lot of these screens at the top, so I'm not going to go through that right this second, but ideally, again, right, this is where all of the technical information and business information is going to be captured, right? It's going to flow through the cloud, but we're going to abstract the business value and provide that. And when we do that abstraction, right, we can start to gain insights and additional alerting around what should be happening or hasn't happened yet. So I can take a proactive approach. So then there's, even on top of all that, right, being able to use the platform to feed like a data lake. I'll talk about that in a use case later, but being able, from a data perspective, right, sharing that data, which is one of the big key points at Manifest, which was data is going to run the world here pretty soon, if it isn't already. Being able to take action on the freshest data possible, right? Being able to take the data in and only use what I need to, right? Because some of this data, some of this stuff is kind of large and obtuse, and we don't need all of it. And our analytics engines run a lot better, right? Not Clio's in general, but just really broadly speaking, right? Analytics platforms run better when you just give them the right amount of data, so they don't have to sort through all of it. It's like, here's what I need to look through, here's all the information. So we're going to take a look at Cockpit. Let me switch over really quickly to my browser. Ryan, is that all good so far? All right, sweet.
Yep, and you're doing well.
All right, so a lot of you, I looked at the list of folks joining, and I'm sure most of you have seen this, but I felt like it was important to level set to give everybody kind of a flavor of what our platform looks like before I start talking about use cases, so we can start to look at where the value comes from. So if we start looking at this information, start looking at the screen, right? I'm an administrator, I can do everything, and I can see everything. But again, right, if we look back at those different personas, from across the little rain or the umbrella at the top, right, I can craft this view to be specific to maybe a customer support rep who's only responsible for 3 or 4 customers. I can tailor this view so that the data that shows up is only those customers' data. So when they're doing their job, they focus on the work that they need to do, and they don't have to go sifting through a bunch of other stuff. But everyone would use the same interface. So that's a huge thing, I think, from a time savings perspective, and really just, I've seen a lot of differences around, the separation of duties, where I've got customer support reps that get a call from a customer, and before they can do anything, they got to submit an IT ticket. And then the IT guys get hammered and can't do any innovation or anything in a timely manner, not because they're not able to, but it's because they're always chasing down some other issue. They're always trying to get somebody else an answer. And if we're able to, kind of expose some of the easier problems, like, hey, why didn't this show up? Or, hey, where's my functional acknowledgement? Or, hey, where is this in the process? If we're able to expose that to the group that's interfacing directly with those, external entities, then their job is easier. And it's less banging around on the IT guys to say, hey, give me an update on this. And they're going to check 2 or 3 different systems. They're trying to track everything down. It's all right here, and they can at least look at it from a business perspective, and I'll show you what that looks like. So in this instance, right, I've got specifically for the logistics side of the house, I've got just the load tender to invoice flow. We do have, we do support all different flavors, right, and procure to pay and order to cash, right, all of that's in here, but I've kind of suppressed it for purposes of being specific today. So inside of here, if I look, you can see that these are kind of contextually clickable. So one of the cool things, and I'll talk more about it in a second, but you can see here, we've got this from an invoicing perspective, right? As the data goes through the cloud, again, I can pick specific bits of data and I can present that into the cockpit. And what we're showing is I can see at a glance that on these 14 invoices, I should be paid, $2,000, almost $3,000. So I can see it very quickly. I know what's going on, and these are ever changing and flowing through the environment as we go. So you can quickly, right, see how exposing this to a group of executives might be a little easier if they don't necessarily care about, hey, did that file make it or not? But hey, what's going on? What's the heartbeat of the business? So as we look at this, right, it could be on load tenders as well, right? We could capture various bits of ways to calculate data. This is just what we came up with as an example. So if I go down into the load tenders, right, so these tiles that we're creating here are customizable, right? They don't have to look like this. This is just what we did. So you can put whatever data you guys want in your environment, in your specific area, right? You may call shipment ID something special. We can name it whatever you'd like. So don't take this as, you know, it has to be this way. It's the only way you can do it. There's a whole host of different ways. So in here, right, if we look at, right, and we go down a layer, right, so now I have all the 204s, but if I want to go look at a particular transaction, so I can see the entire life cycle on the left-hand side, right, which in my opinion is extremely powerful because in one spot I can see now the entire life cycle, whether it's actually, you know, it's actually being processed or what information has gone back out from the TMS. I don't have to check. I know that this file has been sent in and it was transferred to the back end successfully, right? So in our case, we don't have TMS. We're just kind of demoing it up. But this would say, hey, this is going to TMW or whatever ERP or TMS that you have, right, or Turvo or otherwise. Any of those, right, we would see that technical flow down here at the bottom. Now, up here at the top, this is the data that I was talking about where we're just picking the data out. So any of the data that's available, we can grab it and put it here. Again, key value pair naming allows us to make it, you know, easily consumable. And when we pick that data out, it also goes into Elasticsearch behind the scenes. So now the data is available here, but it's also searchable on this side. So if I was an end user and I wanted to go look for, I'm on the phone with a customer, hey, my shipment ID is blah, 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 blah. I put that information in here and I can instantly go find exactly which load or shipment that I'm looking for and then be able to provide them with a response to this load in particular. So in this case, hey, we sent out the invoice down here. We didn't get a functional acknowledgement back, right? Different issue to address. And again, this is a demo environment, so the outbound stuff we don't have a response back, but that's okay. The concept is still there. And so the idea of, you know, providing that level of flexibility and visibility to various parts of the organization is in our view, very powerful. A lot of other things you can do is, again, great power comes great responsibility. If you want to start reprocessing stuff, that's a thing. You can do that all from the cockpit itself. From a technical perspective, right, if we go into technical land a little bit, down here we have the actual data that we received. So this is the actual payload that we received. We can also see what we turned it into. So if we needed to do a comparison, right, it's all here. I can actually compare them side by side here. So I have my original message and I see what it translated. Again, right, typically, you know, it's been working for a while at this point, right? You don't necessarily need to look here, right? You've tested the integration internally, you know what's happening, but if something were to have changed, you could easily, you know, easily is in air quotes, right? If you knew what you were looking at, you could figure out what was going on. But then to go one extra layer down, right, we have this actual flow for this particular inbound document. So if I look at the inbound flow, I can see that this is the inbound payload, right, that we received. So I can look at it. I can download this file to my machine if I wanted to. I can see the transfer log, right? Hey, I received this AS2 transaction. Here's the information I received, so on and so forth. I can look at the transformation, right? What happened when this file was received? So it came in and went to go to the transformation process. Again, these aren't any real errors. They're just steps in our process from a Clio perspective in a demo environment. But you can see, we can look at all different parts of the business process and be able to troubleshoot very quickly when something was to go wrong, or if something were to go wrong. I can also, right, when we start talking about APIs a little bit in a second, we can actually see how long this process took to execute. So if you've got something that's hanging up or you feel like something's running slowly, right, we can look at it and see, hey, what is actually happening and how long is this actually taking? So we can see that these different bits over here, again, when we start looking at outputs and how this goes outbound, right, we can see here, in this case, we just sent a transform document and delivered it to a folder and sent out a 997 outbound. But if I go back to my messages and I go back to my job here, and I look at an outbound flow, right? Let's say this 990, for example, right? Or let's look at a 214. So in this case, right, if I go look at the technical pieces of it, right, I can see that I delivered some data. And then in this case, I actually went and called a REST API to send data to an external endpoint. So in here, we can actually see the payload that we sent. So we're giving you the visibility at a technical level to come in and look at what data was being actually sent outbound. So when I say that, right, that's as the data comes out of the cloud, out of the back end, right, we're getting the data and we're sending a file to a trading partner, and we're actually, posting a REST call to an external application. We'll talk more about that in the use cases section, but again, just wanted to kind of highlight that bit. So now that we have all of this information and kind of captured and encapsulated in a single spot, when we start looking at how do we take action on this data itself, right? I can see on the left-hand side, I have a lot of different values, and if I wanted to just go back and set my 210s and the 204s, 214 sign 204s, right? So I don't need the inbound. But here are all of my documents and I got to get the 990, but that's okay. So in here, right, we're able to then provide a filter. So maybe I wanted to filter this by a specific trading partner. We'll just say Acme for lack of a better discussion at this point. So here's all of my Acme data and all of my transactions about Acme. Again, if I'm only solely responsible for Acme, maybe if I add Adidas to that, right, now I can see Acme and Adidas. And maybe I only care about the 210s. So if I take all of this other stuff off, say, hey, show me my invoices for Acme and Adidas, so that now I can run a report. And maybe my trading partner wants to do reconciliation, right? They want to say, hey, every month send me all of the invoices from the past month so that I can reconcile everything and make sure I've paid everything that I'm supposed to. So we can actually generate that report for you in the cockpit. Once we set this filter up, I can go to save filter. I can save my current filter. You can see I got a whole bunch of them over here. But then I would go to scheduled reports, and I could create a scheduled report that runs on whatever cadence I choose, right? So I'd set my schedule up to run whenever I wanted it to. I would select my filter. I would provide a name for it, and then I could put the email that I wanted this to go to. And then I'd set it and forget it. And every month on whatever day or whatever schedule I set, it would send out a monthly report. It could go to me and it could go to the customer, right? So that everybody's looking at the same thing. But again, right, we're moving from customer service to more, accounts payable, accounts receivable type scenarios where we're exposing these types of reports. Maybe they don't use the cockpit. Maybe they do. But they can get these reports out of being delivered to them as opposed to asking, submitting a ticket or having some custom script that runs against the backend system. It's all right here. So to take some of this alerting and visibility one step further, we've come up with Radar, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard or seen some of the marketing messaging around Radar and what that means and what that does. So I'll just go through it very quickly because I think it's really interesting for folks that have been using the platform for a while. They start to see the benefits, right? When you're coming off an old platform and you're getting on, you've done this migration and now you're getting partners onboarded and you're like, man, if I could get this to tell me if this didn't happen, or if if I've got an obligation to respond to a load tender in X number of times, or if nobody has responded, right? Because maybe it's a special load that comes in and it sits in the TMS and someone's got to take action on it for whatever reason before the response is sent out, maybe. So we can set up a rule inside of the platform that starts a timer when a 204 comes in for a particular customer. So if I looked at, let's say, Amazon, probably not a great example, but we can look at it anyway. That's not a good example. If I go to, let's say, Bbox. So if I look at Bbox and I look at its Radar configuration, right? So I have two different options. I've got an expected volume, and I've got people that use this as almost like a keep alive. or a heartbeat, meaning, hey, I'm expecting at least one purchase order or one load tender over a given period of time from my customer XYZ. And if they're not doing that, I need to call them because that's what we agreed to, so on and so forth. Or, hey, I just want to make sure that it's alive. If they send me one per day, we're good. That kind of thing. Maybe you say, you expect normally 15 and you get 5. You set it for 5. But I can do 2 things. I can mark if it's not received within a given time period. So I can set a secondary threshold that says, hey, nothing is bad yet, but it's not meeting my success criteria, meaning maybe my response time is 3 hours. Or maybe I'm expecting by the end of the day to have 15, and by 6 hours in, 10 hours into the day, I've only got 4. So I'm not going to hit it unless their behavior over time is that they'll dump a bunch later at the end of the day. But again, right, that's a nuance, and you can have multiple variations of this. So when we pick a document in, as an example, let's say a 204, right, to be received every 1 day, mark at risk if not received within, let's say 10 hours, right? So I would receive an alert if I didn't receive at least one 204 from BBOC between midnight and 10 a.m. So if it doesn't happen between 10 a.m., I'm going to get an alert that says, hey, we haven't received one yet. It's not anything that's failed. It's just a warning. So you can take action if you choose. Now, if I don't receive one by the end of the day, right, then it triggers an alert, right? So you two sort of notifications. So that's the expected volume piece. And then when we start looking at response time, this is where it starts to get pretty interesting, right? So now I can have an inbound 204 and say, hey, specifically, and the use case I was working with somebody on the other day is the difference between manufacturing, so bear with me, right? So it's the difference between a inbound purchase order that is drop ship versus normal shipping, right? So inside of the inbound document, there's a delineation, right? There's a unique field that delineates standard shipping or drop shipping. So if I wanted to say, hey, for this particular customer that sends me both, right? They send me regular orders and drop ship orders. I can delineate where a particular condition meets, a condition meets those criteria, and then I can select the criteria, and those bits are actually inside of what we've designed to show up in the tiles. So the ICN, GCN, shipping ID, date, all that information that we wanted to adjust or to be able to calculate these rules on, right? We can pull that data out and call it, and then they show up in these rules to be able to go in and take action on, right? So we can see where a property is, one of these bits is equal to does contain, not contain, right? So you can see the different criteria that you can use to select it. And then we're expecting after receiving, right, or after receiving an 850 or a 204, right, we're going to expect to send a particular 990 back in response to that to ensure within 1 hour. Or I can be a little more specific, right? Before a property or between, right? So we're looking at different ways to track from like a expected ship date or different delivery time windows, right? All those different pieces, right? We can start to use this tool to make sure that we're not missing our SLAs, right? So we're injecting some of that logic into maybe it's a distribution list. Maybe you set up, a distribution list and we just publish it to there, and then the team can take action on it. But it's to provide visibility not only when something bad goes wrong, right? The file came in, it was unable to translate. But hey, if I have customers calling me saying, hey, where's my stuff? We don't see any errors. We just need to know about it. So if things are starting to slow down or back up, right, you can start to see the alerts happen beforehand, and you can address the issue before it becomes a major problem. So that's Radar. There's a whole lot of other things. One last thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is from an API perspective. So when we start talking about being able to manage EDI and API on the same platform, right, we can build a lot of different integrations, and some of the use cases I'm going to talk about here in a second will highlight that. But the idea behind some of this stuff, like let's say a spot quote API or an asset locator API, like where's my where physically is my truck, we can build that integration internally one time, and then from a cloud perspective, I can then from here, right, from the business user's perspective, right, I can go in and say, hey, here's my, give me a price, and I want to have access to these two APIs, or I want to provide access to certain customers. Maybe they're paying, maybe they're not, maybe they're, top-notch customers and you want to do that, right? Depends on how you want to craft it. But we're gonna create a unique identification for them to hit and be able to request data from our API engine inside of the cloud. So we're going to expose these APIs, right? We build it once, and then you can have X number of partners that authenticate with these credentials that we provide, and then access the data the same way, right? They go in, they provide their unique token, and part of the API is, hey, I'm going to use this token to go fetch this information internally, and I'll present it back in a human or a way that they can consume it, right? Whatever that looks like. So in addition to that, right, we can also whitelist these, which is pretty slick from a security perspective, saying, hey, not only do you have to have your credentials, but we can whitelist your IP you're coming from. So it's an extra layer of security from an API perspective. So it's pretty cool there. Again, it's a whole different layer, and I think it shows more, it shows a little better inside of the use cases. So I'm going to switch back over to the presentation here, and we'll meander down into the use cases. So I should be okay on time. All right, so where we are, so these are kind of what I've been through some of these. I've worked with customers as far as like coming up with a design and some of the use cases. So I'm just going to talk through them. I pulled some together, right? So I'm going to start with kind of a trend that I've noticed over time, which is, we'll call them legacy TMSs are kind of, an all-in-one shop, right? There was a finance module, there was a, fuel module, there was a tracking, all of the information, right, inside of this one box. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is kind of the destruction of that. And it's taking this type of stack from a TMS perspective, and it kind of puts it into perspective where they become more segmented to each individual market that they serve. And what that means is you really can get the best thing that fits your business. And as long as you have an integration platform, right, we can take the data and marry it all up together. So we'll take a look at a really cool example that I've been working with a handful of folks on. And it's really slick in that, hey, I've got my new TMS, right? I got a cloud-based API TMS, API-driven TMS, we'll call it Turvo, for example, that has the ability to do a great job at what we as a company want this thing to do from a TMS perspective. And it integrates into our Business Central integration so that we can do invoicing out of Business Central. So I can centralize all of my finances in one spot where I'm billing, whether it be for any sort of financials, is in one spot. It's not, hey, I've got this TMS financial module and I've got these other applications financial modules, and then I got to, from an executive perspective, I got to kind of swizzle all the bits around and create these big reports, and it sounds terrible. So what we're doing is we're allowing the customer to consume the applications that they want, which is, hey, I'm going to use Turvo, but I'm going to invoice out of Business Central. So the flow kind of comes, we receive the 204, it goes into Turvo, all the EDI transactions flow. But then when we're ready to invoice, right, after we've received notification, right, that the load was delivered, right, the final 214 was sent and made it back into Turvo, right, we're going to now issue an invoice. And what that looks like is it's almost like a webhook, right? So a user in Business Central is going to say, invoice this load. And that's going to call an API to Clio. And we're going to receive that and then say, all right, we're going to go call the D365 and say, all right, you've got all the information about the load specifics that I need to create an invoice for this particular load. So we go and fetch the data out of D365 and pull it into CIC Cloud, transform it, right? And whether that means we're augmenting and validating, we may have a cross-reference table, right? We're building the actual invoice to go out to the end customer. So it allows for the flexibility of you to use whatever TMS you want and whatever financial system you want, right? That, as an example, right? But you could put whatever application to application you wanted in that picture. It doesn't have to be invoicing directly, but I've seen a lot of, I've seen one with Revenova as well, where they wanted to use Business Central from an invoicing and financials perspective. So replace TMS with whatever version you want. And I feel like there's a lot of this that's going to be coming along as the TMSs start to become more specific to use cases or different industries or verticals, if you want to call it that. So the other piece to kind of touch on in that respect is, right, just to keep in mind, I'm sure everyone's seen it, but there's a lot of M&A happening around the logistics space. So when you look at it from that maturity curve platform perspective, right, if you have an integration platform, it will, I call it insulate a lot of the internal workings from your external entities. So your trading partners, who you would still have to onboard in the event that you had, some sort of acquisition or merger, right? But you can then easily or more transparently migrate and consolidate your internal systems. So we can continue to allow business to flow while you migrate all of the internal things happen. I've got some slides on that too. Because one of the biggest things that I see a lot of is, okay, we have a problem, we need a solution. How do we get there? And when we get to the how do we get there part, it's a lot of, well, that's going to be a big thing to do. And one of the things that I've seen over time is the ability to kind of mitigate some of that risk from using an integration platform perspective. So we'll talk about that. So here's another one that I think is really slick in that, hey, we are, as part of this, we're enabling a spot quote and a response from the TMS, as well as we're posting to truckstop.com in the event of we have a load that we don't want. So we're providing the abilities to expose those REST APIs externally for people to come hit, and we're able to, hey, when I get some information or when I get a load and my TMS says, no, we're going to send this to the brokerage, right? I can then generate out of my TMS and post it on truckstop.com as an example, right? This is something that somebody's doing today. And in addition to some of this, right, as the data flows, right, when we start looking at how we track and how you can take and glean business value from the technology stack is, if I provide a spot quote API and it goes back into my TMS and it generates a quote ID. So I can have a quote ID be part of the information that's sent back and require the quote ID on my inbound load tender. So inside of the cloud, right, I can start to correlate my number of quotes that I've sent out to a particular customer and the number of loads I've received from those quotes. So you can start to quantify and see who's doing business, right? So if you're, contractually obligated to, receive 100 loads or 100 quotes, but you're only getting 20 loads, as an example, right? You probably want to know about that sooner rather than later. And the other piece of this puzzle isn't just TMS integration. It's also integration to whatever CRM type scenario, which I have some slides on as well, and how that all kind of plays together. Because not everybody's looking at the TMS, not everybody's going to be looking at CIC. It's how can I take the data that I'm exchanging and I'm already doing a lot of things with, how do I plug it into all these other applications? So when we start looking through some of these other use cases, right, here's another cool one is an asset like a geolocation geolocator, where my externally facing API is where's my truck? And I put in my specific truck ID that I'm looking for, and it goes back in and queries some stuff in the TMS, and then it makes an additional call to like a geotab or geotabs, we're sucking data in and putting it in a table. And all of that information is available, so I can provide real-time data to whoever's asking. Where's my truck? Maybe it's a warehouse saying, hey, we've got this delivery window. When is it going to be here? And you can actually see where it is specifically. So it's different tools and different ways to expose internal data securely to the outside world. This one, this addressing data sales outstanding, I think based on some recent visits with some customers, I think this is an area that everyone can benefit from, and that as the carriers become more API enabled, right? Because it's it's a maturity curve, right? They've got to be big enough to want to have APIs, and they've got to have those available. But when you look at it from a perspective of manpower to go gather the bill of lading and the proof of delivery in order to do the invoicing properly from an accounts payable perspective, that data is essential. And there are so many people that are calling and emailing to get the data correctly that if it's available via an API, we can automate that process where, hey, I just received a 210. As part of that, I can now turn around. I've got the invoice number. I can make an API call to the carrier. I can slurp in the payloads, whether that be JSON with base64 encoded, base64 encoded PDF, and inside of CIC, I can take all that information. I can create all of the necessary outputs and deliver them where they need to go, whether that be directly to the ERP or I'm putting them in a folder for the accounts payable folks to look at, and then go into the application and make the adjustments or then approve it. All of those things, right? So that to me is something really, really powerful. And then I just added this right before the call because I thought it was interesting in that, one of the things that we've seen a lot of is providing efficiencies for people to maintain different aspects. And, RMIS, Carrier 401, being able to make sure that the carriers that you're working with are reputable. So it's a way to, can grab the information, process it without having to go manually update everything, right? Because then you got people, because there's a lag, right? You have a carrier that didn't do what they said they were going to do, or took too long, or you had a bad experience, right? It's essentially Yelp. So being able to gather that information, and it's based on how fast people make the update. So it could have happened 3 weeks ago, and you don't know it yet, but once they post it, you can at least pull it in and you can make better decisions on which carriers to broker loads to. So it's a really powerful thing when you start looking at all the variations of how this platform can help you guys from a visibility perspective, and really just having a Swiss Army knife to go and being able to attack and approach any different variation as the market shifts. The last piece is really around data. So being able to handle data in all shapes, forms, and fashions. This is a non-EDI use case. This is, I've got data in Snowflake that I want in Salesforce for my sales team to take action on. And you can put Salesforce, you can put Snowflake in just about any of those other examples as part of the workflow as data comes in and out, depending on what the data is. So I can extract data from one and put it in another. It's all about how we build the business process. And I think the key piece to all of that is you guys, if you have the technical people on board and you have the time, right, you guys can do the work. You don't have to be beholden to Clio to come in and turn all the knobs and, build the engine all of the time, right? We can build it and then you guys can run it and augment it as you need to. So this one is actually taking data from Snowflake, which is actually gathering data from the ERP and the TMS, and actually a third piece, which is all their discounting. And it's going to give me a single payload with multiple, in this case, orders that have different pieces of information that I now need to go and ingest into Salesforce so that they don't have to look in 2 places or 3 places, right? Their sales team looks in Salesforce and that's what they go by, and that's the Bible. So we make the calls and we orchestrate this process as part of it. Now, I put the little notes over here, right? So it's also in addition to their logistics practice, where they're actually exchanging data and sending logistics EDI documents to their trading partner community. So it runs in addition to, outside of EDI on the same platform. And again, right, there's different benefits to the visibility. Maybe it's not so important that this happens, right? It's kind of a pass-fail thing, like, hey, I did it, or hey, I didn't have any data. But these are more business transactional type sort of pieces that you'd want to have those radar rules around. You'd want to have that information at hand to be able to take action. And then if we go a little further, we start looking at some of the larger scale type scenarios where you've got an organization in this case that has a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. They've got it's an international practice. They've got D365 everywhere. I know this isn't logistics, but it is in some cases a very common thing to see. Is that I have these multiple backend systems, right? Maybe it's a consolidation. I've got TMS1, TMS2, TMS3 instead of, and maybe some are on-prem, maybe some are cloud, right? We don't have, we don't really care where they live, but being able to provide the different regions, I should say Asia Pac, but that's okay, right? We can provide the different regions, right? Because their customer bases are slightly different with the user-specific visibility to each of their regions from the same platform, managing the different inputs of data, right? Whether it be Edifact, EDI, API, right? We haven't even talked to them about APIs yet. It's really more like, how do we go on this consolidation and simplification journey from having four, or in this case, three, and they're going to add a fourth one, right? Four separate pieces of the puzzle that all are unique in their own way due to their region and where they live. How can we provide visibility across all of those without re-architecting the whole thing and rebuilding it from scratch? And the idea is that we're going to provide them with that single source of truth across the integration layer to allow them to not just keep the lights on as they roll this out, right? It's a migration process, right? Just like migration from any TMS or ERP that you have or CRM, right? You've got to migrate the data, but you can't turn the lights off, right? Exchanging EDI data or things like that, you can't not accept orders or loads. That's bad. So we've got to find a way to allow for the existing infrastructure to live on while we migrate it over, because Big Bang's not a thing. I mean, people try it, but I'm very risk adverse, and I would never advise anybody to do that. But it's something to think about, right? And as part of the journey, when you start taking a step back and looking at it, is not just, hey, I can't onboard a training partner fast enough. What does that really mean, right? Where can I get some added value as part of my, maturity process or growth journey to be able to maybe leverage the integration platform, not in its fullest capability right now, but as a stepping stone to evolve into, so that 3 or 4 years later, I don't have to retool my environment just because I'm trying to solve a tiny little problem right now. So I have a couple more examples of visibility pass-through, right? So these are some of the ways we can help folks achieve some of these migration patterns where it's like, hey, I'm not going to transform any of the data right now because I've already got a translator on the back end. But I want to be able to use Radar. I want to be able to use Cockpit. I want to give the visibility to my folks. And we're going to live with that. So we just exchange the data and pass it off. And it goes into the Cockpit, and you guys get the visibility and the alerting, and then the transformation comes over time, right? You guys build it in, or we build it in and work with you guys as the back-end systems take shape, right? Maybe you're looking at you're trying to say integration platform, TMS, which goes first. I mean, you could argue that, it would make more sense to have an integration platform first. And that way I can touch the customers just one time, and then I can handle the rest of the back on my own. Some people say, no, I don't want to do the work and keep this thing alive for any longer than I have to. So I'm going to do my TMS first. So you do your TMS first, but then, right, your customers are going to have to change over, or you can run it in parallel. It just depends on a lot of different factors, but just things to think about. As a second step, right, we can start to migrate partners over. So maybe we switch to, in this case, they wanted a canonical approach to their back end. So we're building that canonical as part of our migration path, right? In this case, they had a lot of homegrown stuff that was really, really, really legacy. And what we did was we allowed them to, live on as they wanted to, but simplify it for their next phase, which is, hey, we're going to simplify this. They wanted to, this canonical could be X12, it could be JSON, it could be XML, it could be Flatpak. We don't care. But we would handle the trading partner specific stuff. So looking at it as a way to kind of quiet the noise as to how you get data into your backend systems, regardless of what they are, is really where a lot of the value comes in, and helps provide a lower risk approach to, migrating and evolving from phase to phase. And then the third piece is, hey, we can just write it to a database, or provide an API call, right? Again, this is that, JSON type canonical, where we're just, if you have the ability to create your own APIs, which is where a lot of people end up going, right? I have an API stack, just give me your format, I can consume it. Really makes the integration a lot smoother. So you're not so hard and fast to it. But I'm going to pause there. I think I've got 5 or so minutes for Q&A. Ryan, what do we have?
All right. Well, yeah, as you mentioned, we got about 5 minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 questions tops here, but one did come in. I love it because they were also at Manifest, and I think it's a topic that you recently touched upon towards the end of your presentation, right? But so I was also at Manifest, and there was a theme that implementation of innovation must show just as much urgency in itself as the urgency for new technology to solve problems and create value. How does Clio approach implementation, especially when migrating from old school legacy providers, platforms, or systems?
That's a good one. So our approach is very much a collaborative one. It really is up to the customer to help guide us on what they want it to be. And again, it can take different shapes from a Clio perspective, right? If it's a fully managed service, we're going to do all of the, kind of the gear turning and the engine building. And then they may want to hold on to the customer relationship, so they communicate to the customer. Or it could be, hey, we're going to work with you to design kind of the integration flow. You guys go get trained. We can help you with the first one. And then you guys go build it yourselves or implement it or, onboard the customers. So I guess it's a very methodical approach from a Clio perspective, right? We have timelines and things built out as part of the, the integration or the services statement of work discussions that we'll have to understand which side of the coin and where the responsibilities lie, so that everybody's on the same page. So that's how I'd go with that one.
Yeah, awesome. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to consolidate these 2 questions here. And this one is clickbait worthy, but where are we with the EDI versus API debate? Do you see any of your customers entirely moving away from EDI and strictly using APIs to connect? Is EDI becoming a legacy mandate? And then the second question that I'm going to pair that with is, does CIC also have a built-in EDI mapper?
Okay. So first one is actually a really good question, right? So API versus EDI. I would say that EDI and API are going to coexist, period. There are some companies, we were talking to a handful of guys at Manifest where they're like, we're API first, EDI second. And then there's some people that are, I'll do APIs if you want to, I prefer EDI. It really just depends, I think, on the company themselves and what their preference is. Clio has no preference one way or the other. I see a trend, at least from my perspective, in that there's going to be documents that are going to stay in the X12 format just because that's the way they've always been, like a 204 or a 210. But then there's going to be other documents like a 990 and a 214 that are much more chatty. And those are going to shift to, instead of me force feeding you all of these updates, I'm going to keep the updates and you can hit my API and you can make a request. If your TMS wants 1, you can come and get as many as you want. You can just make the call, say, give me all the updates, right? So you can expose that kind of API and have that type of exchange. And it doesn't have to be an inbound 204. It can be the other way around. Like, hey, I'm going to send you X number of API calls, or I'm going to send you web service consumer, like, bang. If you give me an API, I can consume that if that's how you want to do business. I see that as more of a real sort of scenario as opposed to wholesale shift one way or the other, right? APIs are definitely not going away. And I think they're just, I would call it more complementary. And so to the second question, Yes, we do have a built-in. We have an integration studio. It's an Eclipse-based IDE that allows you to do drag and drop mapping. It's low code, no code. There's a whole ton of actions and ways to manipulate data. I mean, it's a very deep and wide sort of tool. But it does allow for the self-serving capabilities of if Clio were to build this integration and build this map for a particular customer, for a particular integration, let's say, and then all of a sudden they change something, our end users, right, our customers can make that update themselves if they were capable, right? If they knew what they were doing and they were comfortable doing it, they could do it. You don't have to submit a ticket and you don't have to wait for us to do it. Even though our turnaround is pretty quick, depending on the change you're asking. But it really is a nice way for customers to be able to self-serve.
Awesome. All right, right at the buzzer. Thanks, Brian. Unfortunately, we are out of time. However, we did get a few other questions. As I mentioned, Brian or myself will be responding to those directly via email here shortly. Again, we'll be sending out a link to this recording later this week to all of those who registered, and please feel free to pass it along to colleagues, friends, whoever. Thank you to Brian for an awesome presentation. Thank you to everyone who attended and registered. With that, again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.